She had everything: the corner office, the six-figure contracts, the life everyone on her feed envied. And she walked away from all of it at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night and drove until her hands stopped shaking. She didn't drive to her mother's house. She didn't drive to her best friend's apartment. She drove to a garage apartment above a mechanic shop in East Austin, knocked 3 times like she used to when they were kids, and waited. Because when everything you built turns out to be nothing, you go back to the one place that ever felt real. Okay. If this story is already pulling you in, hit that like button, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story travels, and follow along to the very end. You don't want to miss where this goes. The last customer of the day had been a nightmare. A guy in a lifted F250 who'd argued for 20 minutes about a brake job he clearly needed but refused to pay for, then finally caved when Ethan showed him the wear indicator with a flashlight and said flatly, "Your call, man, but your daughter rides in that truck." The guy had gone quiet after that, paid cash, left without a thank you. That was fine. Ethan didn't need a thank you. He needed the $160 to clear out before he ran the card, which it did, just barely, and that was enough. He locked the bay doors at 9:47, which was later than he'd planned because the rotors had taken longer than expected, and he'd had to call his neighbor Mrs. Delgado twice to check on Lily. Mrs. Delgado was 73 and moved slow and had a habit of letting Lily eat cereal for dinner if Ethan wasn't home by 7. But she was also the most reliable person he knew, and she answered every time, which was more than he could say for most people in his life. He climbed the exterior stairs to his apartment, metal steps bolted to the back of the building, kind of thing that swayed slightly in wind, and he could already hear the television through the door. Mrs. Delgado had it turned up loud because her hearing aid was acting up again. He pushed the door open and the sound hit him like a wall. Some nature documentary about whales. Lily was asleep on the couch with one sock on and her arm hanging off the cushion, fingers nearly touching the floor. "She went down about 8, Mrs. Delgado said, gathering her purse. "Ate half a quesadilla. Didn't want the rest." "That's fine." He crossed to the couch and crouched down, looking at his daughter's face. She was 5, and even asleep she looked like she was thinking about something. She had that expression, faintly troubled, brow just barely creased, that she'd had since she was an infant, and that her mother, before she left, used to call her old soul face. "Thanks, Rosa. I'll get you back for the extra hour." "Don't worry about the hour. You look terrible." "Thanks. Eat something." She pointed at the counter. "I left rice." After she went home, Ethan turned the television down to almost nothing. He didn't pick Lily up and carry her to bed yet because he'd learned early on that moving her when she was this deep asleep usually woke her, and then it was another 40 minutes of getting her settled again. Better to just leave her. He'd get her in an hour. He ate the rice standing up at the counter. It was good. She'd put a little butter in it the way she knew he liked. And he ate all of it, even though he wasn't particularly hungry, because eating was one of those things he'd stopped doing on schedule and had to remind himself to do like a task on a list. Eat, sleep, call the insurance company back about the billing dispute. Buy more of those hair ties Lily liked because she kept losing them. He was washing the bowl in the sink, staring out the small window above it at the parking lot below, when the knock came. 3 of them. Light, hesitant. The knock of someone who wasn't sure they were supposed to be there. Ethan stood still for a second. It was close to 11. Mrs. Delgado would knock louder and longer. His friend Marcus, who came by occasionally, always called first. He couldn't think of who else it would be. He dried his hands and went to the door and opened it. He did not immediately say anything because his brain needed a moment to catch up with what his eyes were seeing. Sophie Carter was standing on his landing. He didn't know how to process this. She looked like herself and also like someone who'd been through something. She was wearing what might have been a nice blazer at some point, navy blue, but it was wrinkled now, and she had on dark slacks and flats, and her hair, which she'd always kept long, was pulled back in the kind of way that suggested it had been pulled back neatly at some point that morning, and then the rest of the day had happened to it. She had her arms crossed over her chest. Not like she was cold, like she was holding herself together. "Hi," she said. "Sophie." "Yeah." A pause. "Hi." He just looked at her for a second. How did you? I still had your number in my phone. I looked up the address. She looked past him into the apartment, then back at him. I should have called. I know I should have called. I was driving and I started thinking and I ended up here and She stopped, pressed her lips together. Can I come in? He stepped back from the door. She sat in the kitchen while he made coffee, which she asked for but didn't really drink. She kept wrapping her hands around the mug and staring at it. He sat across from her and waited, because he'd learned a long time ago that some conversations couldn't be rushed, and this one, whatever it was clearly that kind. The apartment was small. He'd never really gotten used to seeing it through other people's eyes. The single couch, the secondhand coffee table with the ring stain that he'd tried to sand out and couldn't, the drawings Lily had taped to the lower half of the wall because she liked them at her eye level. It wasn't embarrassing, exactly. It just was what it was. Your daughter? Sophie said, nodding toward the couch where Lily was still asleep. Lily, she's 5. Sophie looked at her for a long moment. Something moved across her face. She's beautiful. Yeah. He didn't say anything else about that. Sophie looked back down at the coffee. I'm sorry to just show up like this. It's fine. It's not really fine. It's almost 11 o'clock and you were probably about to go to sleep. And She let out a breath. I drove for 4 hours, Ethan. I just drove. And I ended up here and I don't fully know what that means yet. I'm working on that. 4 hours from where? Dallas. I was in Dallas for a project, a big one. She finally took a sip of the coffee, set it down. I walked out of the meeting at 6 o'clock and I got in my car and I just started driving and I didn't go to my apartment and I didn't call anyone. I kept driving until I stopped. He watched her. And you stopped here. I stopped here. She met his eyes. I know that's weird. A little, he said. Not unkindly. She almost smiled. Yeah. He leaned back in his chair. Outside, a truck went by on the street below, bass from its stereo thumping through the window glass and then fading out. Lily shifted on the couch, resettled. Neither of them moved until she went still again. How long has it been? He asked. Since we actually talked? Like really talked? Sophie considered it. 7 years? Maybe closer to 8? A pause. We texted when your mom passed. We did. He'd appreciated that. He'd meant to say so at the time, and then the days had gotten away from him the way they always did when something big happened. How's your family? My parents retired to Scottsdale. My brother moved to Portland. She said it the way people said things they'd already said 100 times in 100 different conversations. Facts about their life that had become almost detached from them. I'm in Austin now, actually. I've been here for 2 months. I hadn't reached out yet. He looked at her steadily. Why not? She didn't answer right away. I didn't know how to explain why I'd waited so long. That's not really an explanation. No, she agreed. It's not. They'd grown up 3 houses apart on a street called Cedar Bluff, in a neighborhood that wasn't bad but wasn't great. The kind of place where people either got out and made something of themselves or got stuck in a loop they couldn't see their way out of. Ethan and Sophie had spent so much of their childhood together that people used to ask if they were related. They weren't. They just moved in that easy orbit that happens sometimes between kids who find each other early enough that the friendship forms before self-consciousness sets in, before you start performing yourself for other people. They'd been in the same grade, same classes mostly. She was better at school than he was, and she was also more ambitious about it, more deliberate. Even at 12, she had ideas about where she was going. He'd admired that about her while also not fully understanding it. He'd always been more interested in how things worked than where he was going to end up, which was a trait that served him well in a garage and less well in conversations about 5-year plans. They drifted the way people do. She went to UT Austin on scholarship, then to a firm in Houston, then somewhere bigger. He'd started working for a guy named Cal, who ran a repair shop on the east side, and eventually, through a combination of hard work and Cal's generosity when he retired, ended up with the lease on the building and the equipment and the customer list. He'd been married for 2 years. It hadn't worked. Lily had been the one good thing that came out of it, and he didn't spend a lot of time grieving the rest. He and Sophie had done the thing people do, liked each other's posts occasionally, left comments that didn't require much. The kind of digital proximity that lets you feel like you haven't fully lost someone without ever actually having them. Lily woke up at 11:30, which surprised him because she usually slept through everything. She sat up slowly, blinking, and stared at Sophie with the frank unself-consciousness of a 5-year-old who hasn't learned yet to pretend she's not looking at someone. "Hi," Lily said. "Hi," Sophie said back. "Who are you?" "Sophie. I'm a friend of your dad's. We knew each other when we were little." Lily considered this. "Like kids?" "Yeah, like kids." Lily nodded slowly, like this was a reasonable thing for adults to have been. Then she looked at Ethan. "Daddy, can I have water?" He got up and got her water. She drank half of it, handed it back to him, and then looked at Sophie again. "Do you live here?" "No," Sophie said. "I was just visiting." "Where do you live?" "Lily," Ethan said. "I'm just asking." "I live not too far from here, actually," Sophie said. She didn't seem bothered by it. She seemed, if anything, like it was the most uncomplicated conversation she'd had in a while. "In an apartment." "We live in an apartment, too." Lily looked around like she was taking inventory of this fact. "But we have a garage." "I know, your dad fixes cars." "He fixed Mrs. Delgado's car. It made a bad noise and then he made it stop." She yawned, not covering her mouth. "She gave us tamales after." "That sounds like a good deal." "It was good tamales." She looked at Ethan. "Can I go to bed now?" He carried her to her room. She was too old to really be carried, technically, but she still let him do it, and he wasn't going to stop until she told him to, and she was mostly asleep again before he got her settled. He stood in the doorway for a second, looking at her in the blue dark of the nightlight. The old soul face. He always checked that she was breathing. He'd done it since the hospital, and he'd probably do it until she left for college, and he fully understood this was irrational. And he did it anyway. When he came back to the kitchen, Sophie was rinsing her mug in the sink. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know." She set it on the drying rack, turned around, leaned against the counter with her arms crossed again, that held-together posture. "She's wonderful, Ethan." "She has her moments." "No, I mean, genuinely. The way she just talked to me, like I was just a person who showed up." She shook her head. "My colleagues' kids do this thing where they look at me and you can already see they've been prepped, like be nice to daddy's important friend, and they say these very careful little sentences." She looked down. "Lily just asked me where I lived." She asks everyone where they live. She's going through a phase where location is very important to her. Sophie made a sound that was almost a laugh. It softened her face considerably. He'd forgotten, or maybe he'd stored it somewhere he hadn't accessed in a long time, what her real laugh looked like, the way it came in before she was ready for it, and she'd sort of duck her head with it. "You want to tell me what happened in Dallas?" he said. The almost laugh went away. "I want to," she said. "I'm not sure I know how to explain it in a way that doesn't make me sound like a person who has everything and is ungrateful for it." "Try anyway." She looked at him for a moment. Then she pulled out the chair across from him and sat back down. The project was a contract she'd been working on for 8 months. A development firm. Commercial real estate, major client. The kind of account that got you promoted or at least got you talked about in the right rooms. She was the lead. She'd built the whole thing up from a preliminary pitch, and she was good at it, genuinely good at it, because she was smart and thorough, and she knew how to present work in a way that made people trust it. The meeting in Dallas had been the final presentation before signing, the kind of thing you'd worked 8 months for. And she'd sat in that conference room at 6 in the evening. They'd pushed it back twice because the client's CEO had been running late. And she'd watched herself present and she'd thought very clearly and without drama, "I don't want this. Not I'm nervous, not I'm tired, just I don't want this." "I finished the presentation," she said. "I answered all their questions. I shook everyone's hand. And then I went to the parking garage, got in my car, and I drove south." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Did you tell your firm?" "I sent an email, vague, Said I needed time. She pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of her nose. My phone has been going off for 5 hours. I've been ignoring it. Sophie. I know. She lowered her hand. I know what I'm doing. I know what this looks like. I'm not having a breakdown. I'm having a very clear moment of vision, and I'm terrified of it, which is apparently what a clear moment of vision feels like. I didn't know that. She looked at him. Does that make sense? More than you'd think, he said. She looked around the apartment again. The Lily drawings on the wall, the stack of mail on the counter that he kept meaning to go through, the hook by the door with 3 jackets on it, 2 his and 1 tiny. When I was driving, she said, I kept thinking about, this is going to sound strange. Go ahead. I kept thinking about the summer before 8th grade, when you had that paper route and you used to let me ride on the back of your bike, and we'd finish early and go sit on the hill by the water tower. She watched him. Do you remember that? He remembered. The hill had been behind the middle school, this long slope of brown grass that faced west, and in the summer it caught the evening light in a particular way. They used to throw rocks down the hill and see how far they'd go. Stupid kid stuff. Good stupid kid stuff. You used to bring those orange crackers, he said. The cheese ones, from the vending machine. She nodded. I spent a lot of time thinking about that today. That hill. That specific light. She paused. I think because it was the last time I remember feeling like I was in the right place without having worked for it, without having earned it. It was just where I was. He didn't say anything. And I drove 4 hours and knocked on your door, she said, because I think some part of me thought that maybe you still had some of that, whatever that was. She looked almost embarrassed. And I know that's not really... It makes sense, he said. It's a little insane. Sure, he said, but it makes sense. He made up the couch for her with a set of sheets he kept folded in the closet shelf and a pillow that was the good one because the other one had a slow leak and he'd been meaning to replace it for 2 months. She protested twice and he ignored both protests. You're not driving anywhere tonight, he said. You've been on the road for 4 hours and you're running on adrenaline and whatever was in that coffee. Sleep. We can figure out the rest tomorrow. The rest, she said, like it was a long list. One thing at a time. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. You're very calm about this. You'd be surprised what 5 years of single parenting does for your ability to deal with unexpected situations. Does it work for everything? Most things, he said. Dentist appointments are still rough. She laughed. A real one this time, not the almost laugh. And there it was, the way it snuck up on her, the slight duck of her head. He hadn't seen that in 8 years. He turned off the kitchen light, said goodnight, went to his room and lay down with his eyes on the ceiling and his hands flat on the mattress, and spent a while not sleeping, thinking about the hill behind the middle school and the particular angle of the summer light and the weight of 2 people sitting on an incline throwing rocks just to see how far they'd go. In the morning, Lily found Sophie on the couch before Ethan was up. He heard them talking through his door, Lily's voice going steadily, Sophie's answering in those half-awake, accommodating tones of someone who was not yet fully conscious, but was being asked questions that required consciousness. He lay there and listened for a minute. He couldn't make out the words, just the rhythm of it. Lily had that quality where she filled silence instinctively, and Sophie, to her credit, seemed to be keeping up. He got up and made breakfast. Eggs and toast and orange juice because that was what there was. Sophie came into the kitchen with her blazer off and her hair down. She must have taken it out at some point in the night. And she looked markedly less like someone bracing for impact. Your daughter told me about a ladybug she found last week, Sophie said. Apparently it was the best ladybug she'd ever seen. She said that about a ladybug she found the week before that too, Ethan said. She's very optimistic about ladybugs. It had 4 spots, Daddy, Lily said, pulling herself up into her chair. The other one only had 3. I know, Bud. More spots is better. If you say so. Sophie sat down and he put a plate in front of her, and she looked at it like she was briefly surprised that someone had made her food. Then she picked up her fork. He noticed she didn't check her phone. It was sitting face down on the counter where she'd put it when she came in last night, and it stayed there through the whole breakfast. His first appointment was at 8:30. He couldn't move it. It was a fleet vehicle, a plumbing company that brought him 3 trucks a month, and you didn't reschedule those. I have to open up at 8, he told her. You don't have to leave, you can stay. She looked at him. Ethan, no agenda, he said. Stay, don't stay. It's up to you. He poured his coffee into a travel mug. Mrs. Delgado is next door if you need anything. She'll try to feed you. He was halfway down the stairs when she appeared in the doorway above him. My firm is going to call, she said. Probably. I have contracts. I have obligations. He looked up at her. The morning sun was coming sideways off the roofline, and she was standing in it with her hand on the door frame, and she looked He was going to stop thinking along these lines very shortly, but just for the moment, she looked like she'd always looked when she was making up her mind about something. Slightly fierce, slightly uncertain, both at once. You know what your obligations are, he said. You're the smartest person I've ever known. You'll figure it out. She held on to the door frame. That's not particularly helpful advice. No, he agreed, but it's true. He went down the stairs and unlocked the bay door and pulled it up, and the day came in smelling like oil and motor exhaust and the warm beginning of another Texas summer. He had a fleet truck, a brake job, and someone's AC compressor on the schedule. He had $47 in his personal checking account until the fleet payment cleared on Friday. He had a daughter who was in the apartment upstairs, probably telling a woman she'd just met about ladybug taxonomy. He pulled the first truck into the bay and got to work. 3 hours later, when he came up for coffee, Sophie was still there. She'd moved the face-down phone to her bag. She was sitting on the floor with Lily, both of them bent over a drawing Lily was making, and Sophie was saying very seriously, I think the horse needs more legs, personally. And Lily was saying, equally seriously, horses only have 4 legs, Sophie. And Sophie was saying, are you absolutely sure about that? He stood in the doorway and watched them for a second. Then he poured his coffee and went back down. The calls came by mid-morning. He knew they did because he could hear, faintly, through the floorboards when the garage was quiet, the muffled sound of Sophie's voice going tight and controlled the way voices do when you're trying to hold a professional conversation while something inside you is pulling in the opposite direction. She came down to the garage in the early afternoon. She didn't say anything at first, just stood watching him work. He was doing a coolant flush on a 2019 Tacoma, which was not complicated but required paying attention to specific things in a specific order, so he didn't stop what he was doing. After a while, she sat down on the stool he kept in the corner and crossed her arms the way she did, and said, They want me back in Dallas by Thursday. What do you want? He said, without looking up. A pause. I don't know yet. Okay. That's a problem. I'm supposed to know. I've always known. She was quiet for a moment. My manager, Gwen, she's not a bad person. She's actually genuinely not a bad person. She called 3 times this morning. Very calm, very measured. She said the client is asking questions. She said we can fix this. She said, Sophie, you've worked too hard for too long to let it unravel over one bad day. Was it a bad day? She thought about it. It was a clear day, which is different. He set down the wrench and looked at her. She was sitting straight-backed on the stool, ankles crossed, and there were faint shadows under her eyes from the not entirely restful night on his couch, and something in her face that he associated specifically with someone in the middle of a decision they already know the answer to but aren't ready to say out loud yet. What do you need right now? He said. Not in Dallas, not in your career. Right now, today. She looked at him for a long moment. I need to not go anywhere for a couple days, she said. I think I need to just be somewhere that isn't trying to get something from me. He nodded. Then stay. Ethan, Sophie, stay. A couple days isn't going to break anything that isn't already broken. He picked up the wrench again. Mrs. Delgado has a guest room that she rents to her niece sometimes. She'd do it for you, or there's the couch again, but I warn you the pillow has a slow leak. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. The pillow had a slow leak, I noticed. I've been meaning to replace it. I believe you, she said. Mostly. She sat there for another few minutes, just watching him work. No conversation, no performance of conversation, just the specific quiet of a garage in the middle of the day.
The sound of the street outside, the occasional rattle of something through the walls, the work itself. Eventually, she got up. "I'm going to take Lily to the park," she said, "if that's okay." He looked up.
"She'll hold your hand the whole way there and report back every notable bird." "I'm counting on it," Sophie said. He watched her walk up the stairs, and then he went back to the coolant flush, and he did not spend the next 45 minutes thinking about the way she'd said, "I need to just be somewhere that isn't trying to get something from me," and the specific, particular weight of that sentence. He didn't think about it at all, or he thought about it less than he might have, which was the closest he could usually get to not thinking about something. The Tacoma was done by 3. He rolled the next car in and kept working. Check. That evening, after Lily's bath and the approximately 9,000 negotiations that preceded actually getting her into bed, Ethan sat on the back steps of the building in the blue dark of a Texas Tuesday and drank a beer and looked at the parking lot and thought about nothing specific. Sophie came out after a while and sat beside him on the step. She'd borrowed a t-shirt from the pile on his bathroom shelf. He'd told her to help herself, and she had her knees pulled up and she'd washed off whatever she'd been wearing makeup-wise, and she looked younger this way, more like the person he remembered. "She made me read the Ladybug book 4 times, Sophie said. "Yeah, it's a phase." "She knows every single page by heart. She's just checking if you're reading it right. She's checking if you're invested," Ethan said. "If you rush or skip, she notices." Sophie turned her head to look at him. "You've figured her out pretty well." "I've had 5 years," he paused. "You get a lot of data." She looked back out at the parking lot. "She asked if you were my friend." "What'd you say?" "I said yes." A beat. She said, "Are you going to come back?" He was quiet. "I didn't know what to say," Sophie said. "I said I hope so." She pulled at a loose thread on the hem of the t-shirt, which was honest, but it also felt like something I wasn't allowed to promise. "No," he said. "You're not. Not yet." She turned to look at him again, and this time she held it. He could feel it. The particular quality of being looked at by someone who actually knew you at some point, who had a prior version to compare against. It was different from being looked at by strangers or colleagues, or even people who knew him now. It had a different texture. "I don't know what I'm doing," she said quietly. Not distressed, just honest. "That's fine," he said. "Is it? I didn't know what I was doing for most of my 20s. And then I had Lily, and I really didn't know what I was doing. And eventually you figure out the next thing, and then the next one, and the picture comes together." He took a drink of the beer. "You don't have to have the whole thing mapped before you start." She let out a breath that was close to a laugh. "You sound different than I remember." "I'm older." "So am I, but I still want the map." She paused. "I thought by 30 I'd be further along. Not career-wise, just I thought I'd feel more like a person who knew where they were." "You drove 4 hours and knocked on my door at 11 o'clock, he said. "That feels like someone who knows where they are." She was quiet for a second. Then, quietly, "Yeah." They sat there for a while, in the blue dark, in the not-quite silence of a city that doesn't fully go quiet. Somewhere down the street, a car alarm went off briefly and then stopped. An upstairs window in the building across the alley lit up orange, someone in a kitchen, someone living their ordinary evening. The beer was cold. The air still had the warmth of the day in it, that particular Texas heat that doesn't fully let go even after dark. Sophie's phone buzzed in her pocket. She took it out, looked at it, turned it face down on the step beside her. "Dallas?" he said. "Dallas," she said. Neither of them said anything else about it. Dallas didn't wait. By Wednesday morning, Sophie's phone had accumulated 14 missed calls, 23 text messages, and an email from the firm's legal team with a subject line that Ethan caught a glimpse of when she left it open on the kitchen counter. Contractual obligations. Urgent review required. She'd closed the email without responding and poured herself more coffee and stood at the window looking down at the garage bay where Ethan was already pulling in the first vehicle of the day. And she'd stayed there for a while with her mug and her jaw set and her eyes doing that thing where they weren't really focused on anything in particular. Lily, who had no patience for adults who stared out windows, tugged her sleeve.
Sophie, can you do my hair? Sophie looked down. I'm not very good at hair. That's okay. Lily was already holding out a brush and two of the elastic bands with the little plastic balls on them. I'll tell you what to do.
So that was how this morning started. Sophie sitting on the edge of the couch with Lily on the floor between her knees, following instructions with more seriousness than she'd brought to most boardroom presentations, while the phone sat face down on the counter and gathered messages from people who expected things from her. She did 2 lopsided pigtails. Lily examined them in the bathroom mirror for a long, judicial moment. They're not even, she said. No, Sophie agreed. That one's higher. She pointed at the left one. I know, I'm sorry. Lily looked at them a little longer. It's okay, she finally said, with the magnanimity of someone deciding to let something go. I kind of like it. Sophie laughed. The real one. The one that snuck up on her. And Lily grinned at herself in the mirror, pleased with both the hair and the reaction, and neither of them heard Ethan come up the stairs until he was in the kitchen doorway looking at both of them. Interesting choice, he said, looking at the pigtails. Sophie did it, Lily said. I see that. She's not very good at hair, Lily informed him. I told her that, Sophie said. She did, Lily confirmed, and then she was off down the hallway to get her shoes, already moving on to the next thing with the total commitment speed of a 5-year-old who had decided the current moment was complete. Ethan looked at Sophie. She shrugged, a little self-conscious. I tried. They look fine, he said. He went to the coffee maker. You eat anything yet? I had some of the bread. That's not eating. It's eating adjacent. He pulled out the eggs without responding to that. She watched him crack 4 of them into the pan, the easy unself-consciousness of someone doing something they'd done 10,000 times, and she felt it was hard to name exactly, but it was something in the vicinity of relief. Not happiness, not yet. Just the particular relief of being in a place where nobody needed anything from her, except maybe to eat breakfast. Her phone lit up on the counter, face down, so she only saw the glow. She didn't turn it over. You're going to have to deal with that eventually, Ethan said, not looking up from the eggs. I know. I'm not telling you to go back. I'm saying you can't just... I know, Ethan. She set down the mug. I'm aware that I have responsibilities. I'm aware that this is not sustainable. I just need... She stopped. I need a few more days to figure out what I actually want before I let them talk me back into something. He slid the eggs onto a plate and set it in front of her without comment. She ate. They didn't talk about Dallas for the rest of the morning, but it stayed in the room with them, the way unresolved things do, present and heavy in the pauses between ordinary sentences, in the looks that lasted a half-second longer than necessary, in the way Sophie kept her phone face down on whatever surface she set it on, like she could reduce its weight by not seeing the screen. The truth was that the situation at the firm was not as simple as she'd walked out. The project she'd left wasn't just her account. There were 3 other people on the team, junior members who'd worked the same 8 months she had, and who were now fielding questions she should have been there to answer. There were deliverables with her name on them. There was a client who had specifically requested her continued involvement in writing, which her manager Gwen had forwarded her 3 times now with increasingly less calm framing. And there was the legal email, which she'd read enough of to know that the language in it was the kind that was meant to sound like a warning without quite being one yet. She knew all of this. She wasn't delusional. She'd built her career on being the person who showed up, the person who completed things, the person whose name meant this will get done. Walking away from that identity was not a small thing, and she was not treating it like one. She just needed... She kept coming back to this. She needed to not make the decision while she was still in the middle of the feeling that had made her drive 4 hours in the first place. Because if she called Gwen back right now, exhausted and off balance, she would agree to come back. She knew herself well enough to know that. And she wasn't sure yet whether coming back was the right thing or just the easier thing, and she'd spent 10 years confusing those 2 categories, and she was done with that. So she kept the phone face down, and she ate Ethan's eggs, and she watched Lily try to put her own shoes on the wrong feet and then accept corrections with the same regal graciousness she'd applied to the uneven pigtails, and she let the morning be what it was. Amit, Ethan's garage ran on rhythm more than schedule. He had appointments, technically, but the day had a way of reorganizing itself around whatever actually showed up. The fleet trucks that ran late, the walk-ins with something urgent, the customer who'd called 3 days ago and was just now appearing. He'd learned early not to resist the reorganization. You dealt with what was in front of you. His friend Marcus came by around noon to return a socket set he'd borrowed in April. Marcus was a big man, broadly built, slow-moving, one of those people who seemed to require more space than average, not because of ego, but just because of the actual physical reality of them. He'd worked for the electric company for 11 years and spent most of his off time rebuilding a 1972 Chevelle that was perpetually 3 months from finished. He handed over the socket set, looked at Ethan, looked at the stairs to the apartment. "You got someone up there? Friend staying for a few days?" Marcus nodded slowly. He was not a person who pushed. "What kind of friend?" "Old kind. From the neighborhood." Another slow nod. Marcus looked at the socket set in Ethan's hands, then back at his face. "You good?" "I'm fine." "Okay." Marcus didn't look entirely convinced, but he also knew Ethan well enough to know that if something was being offered, it would be offered in full, and if it wasn't being offered, then asking more questions just made the other person feel managed. So he let it go. "I got a noise from the left rear of the Chevelle. Comes and goes. Probably the exhaust hanger. Bring it by Friday." "Can't Friday. Saturday?" "Saturday works." Marcus nodded, started back toward his truck, then stopped. "The kid upstairs. She's still doing that thing where she yells your name down the stairs like a fire alarm?" "Every time," Ethan said. Marcus smiled. It was a slow smile, like everything else about him. "Good," he said, and got in his truck and left. Sophie came down an hour later. She'd changed into jeans and a plain white shirt she'd gotten from somewhere. He didn't ask. And she had her phone in her hand now, which meant something had shifted. She stood at the edge of the garage bay and watched him work for a moment and then said, "I need to talk to you about something." He pulled himself out from under the car, sat up on the creeper. "Okay." She came a few steps closer. "My managing partner called. Not Gwen. The partner above her. Randall." She said the name the way people say the names of people who have a specific kind of authority over them. Not afraid of it exactly, but acknowledging its weight. "He's asking for a meeting, here in Austin, not Dallas." Ethan waited. "He's coming down tomorrow." She pressed her lips together. "He says we can talk about options, which means they're willing to negotiate something, which means they're more worried about losing me entirely than they're letting on in the emails." "Is that good?" "I don't know. It means I have leverage I didn't know I had, which should feel good, but mostly just feels like another way to be obligated." She looked at the floor of the garage. "I don't want to go back to that project. I know that. I've been avoiding saying it out loud, but I know that." "Say it louder then." She looked up at him. "I don't want to go back to that project." "Okay," he said. "So what do you want to say to Randall?" She exhaled. "I want to say that I'll finish what's mine to finish. The deliverables, the documentation, the handoff. I'll give them clean work. I'll make sure the team isn't left hanging. But I'm not continuing on that account." She was working it out as she said it, and he could see the moment it settled into something solid. "And I need to renegotiate my role broadly. Because this isn't the first time I've felt like this. It's the first time I've actually listened to it." Ethan looked at her steadily. "You sound like you've already decided." "I'm trying it out," she said. "Sounds decided to me." She shifted her weight. "What if he doesn't accept it?" "Then you figure out the next thing." He stood up, wiped his hands on the shop rag. "You said it yourself. They're more worried about losing you than they're showing. That's useful." "You make it sound simple." "No," he said. "I make it sound survivable." "Which it is." She looked at him for a moment, and something in her face settled slightly. Not relaxed exactly, but less braced. Like she'd put something down she'd been carrying in an awkward position, and her shoulders were remembering how to sit normally. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Go ahead." "When did you get like this?" He frowned slightly. "Like what?" "Like," she gestured vaguely. "Like this. Calm. You were always steady, but not... You used to get worked up about things. You argued with your mom about everything. You punched a vending machine once in ninth grade. It owed me $1.25. The machine still didn't give you the chips. No, he agreed. So I learned something. He tossed the rag on the workbench. When Jamie left, Lily's mom, Lily was 9 months old, and He paused, considered how much of this to say. I was not calm about it. I was pretty far from calm. I was angry for a long time. About the situation, about being left with an infant, about not having the luxury of falling apart because someone needed me to function. He looked at his hands, and then at some point I wasn't angry anymore. Not because I'd worked through it in some tidy way. I just ran out of the energy for it, and on the other side of that was something that worked better. So, he shrugged. Not calm exactly, more like I just stopped spending energy on things I couldn't change. Sophie was quiet for a moment. Does that work? Mostly, he said. Not always. I still punched a wall about the insurance thing in March. What insurance thing? Don't ask. He moved toward the shop sink. You're meeting with Randall. Where are you thinking? He suggested a hotel lobby, neutral. That's his neutral, not yours. She considered that. You think I should pick the place? I think walking into somewhere he chose with the name of his firm in the room doesn't help you feel like your own person. He ran the water. Pick a coffee place. Somewhere you like. Let the geography be yours. She was quiet again. Then, you're really different than I remembered. You keep saying that. Because it keeps being true. Lily's teacher sent home a note that afternoon about an optional show and tell that Friday. Lily read it, or had it read to her, holding the paper with both hands with the gravity of someone receiving official correspondence, and announced that she wanted to bring the ladybug habitat kit she'd gotten for her birthday, but hadn't set up yet. We have to build it first, she told Sophie at dinner, as though this was obviously Sophie's problem to help solve. I'm not sure I know how to build a ladybug habitat, Sophie said. The box has instructions. Is it hard? Lily considered this with genuine seriousness. There are a lot of steps, but Daddy always reads the instructions first so he knows which steps to skip. That's not what I tell her to do, Ethan said. That's what you do, though, Lily said, and she wasn't wrong, and Sophie laughed into her fork. They built the habitat after dinner, or started it, because it turned out there were indeed a lot of steps, and the plastic components were more fiddly than the box photo suggested, and Lily kept wanting to put the pieces together before Ethan had finished reading the relevant section. At some point, Sophie was on the floor with Lily, and Ethan was crouched beside them, and they had little plastic pieces spread across the coffee table, and nobody had their phone out, and the television wasn't on, and the evening just moved at the pace the habitat required. This piece doesn't fit, Lily announced, holding up 2 sections. You have to twist it, Ethan said. I am twisting it. Other direction. This is the other direction. That's the same direction. No, it's... Oh, click. Lily held it up triumphantly. I did it. You did, Sophie said. Sophie, you do the next one. Sophie took the pieces. Which way do I twist? I'll tell you, Lily said, leaning in with the concentration of a very small technical advisor. Ethan watched them from his position on the floor. Sophie's shoulder was touching his arm without either of them noticing, both of them leaning toward Lily and the habitat pieces. The apartment was quiet, except for the voices and the small clicks of plastic. Outside, the street was doing its ordinary nighttime thing. A car going by, a dog briefly, a door somewhere. He'd forgotten that a room could feel like this. Or maybe he hadn't forgotten. Maybe he just stopped expecting it and had quietly reclassified it as something that didn't belong to the category of his life anymore. He looked at Sophie's hands working the plastic pieces under Lily's direction, and he thought about what she'd said on the back steps the night before. I need to just be somewhere that isn't trying to get something from me. And he thought about the other thing she'd said, which was that she'd always compared everything to what she'd found here, or what she'd found in proximity to here, back when they were kids on a hill behind the middle school with a bag of orange cheese crackers. He didn't say any of that. He picked up the next set of pieces and found the instruction and kept going. They finished most of the habitat and left the last panel for daylight, because the light was better and Lily was fading, and there was the standard negotiation cycle to get through before she'd actually admit to being tired. Sophie did the pigtail thing in reverse, took them out gently, worked out the tangles with the brush that lived on the bathroom shelf. And Lily tolerated this with unusual patience, which meant she was more tired than she was letting on. "Will you be here tomorrow?" Lily asked Sophie from the state of almost asleep. Sophie in the doorway said, "Yes." It wasn't a complicated answer, but she said it without hesitating, and Ethan, leaning against the hall wall where Lily couldn't see him, felt the weight of it settle in his chest, somewhere it had no particular business being. Randall showed up at 10 the next morning in a car that cost more than Ethan's monthly revenue, and with the specific brand of easy confidence that came from decades of being the person in the room who other people adjusted their behavior for. He was 60-something, silver-haired, wearing a jacket without a tie, in the way that was meant to signal "I'm relaxed about this," while everything else about him communicated the opposite. Sophie had picked a coffee shop on South Congress, a place she'd apparently come to a few times in her 2 months in Austin, a narrow room with mismatched chairs and a counter that didn't take reservations. She didn't ask Ethan to come. She hadn't said anything about it one way or the other. But when she left the apartment at 9:45, pressed and composed in a way that reminded him of the blazer she'd arrived in, he'd said, "Call me after." And she'd said, "Okay," without looking back, which meant she was already partially inside the conversation she was about to have. He was doing an oil change and brake inspection on a Honda when his phone rang at 12:15. "How'd it go?" he said, hitting the speaker. A pause. "He offered me a reduced caseload and a higher cut of the billings. Is that good?" "It's more than I expected." She sounded not happy, but clearer than she had in days, like something had been resolved enough to let her breathe normally again. "I told him I'd give them 60 days to transition the project fully and that I'd be available for handoff meetings, but not primary account work. He accepted it." "So you're staying in Austin?" "I'm staying in Austin." A beat. He did not seem thrilled. "But he said yes." "He said yes. He needs me more than he wants to admit, and we both knew it walking in, so—" She paused. "I think I cried a little in the car on the way over, which was not ideal." "That's fine. It wasn't very professional. You were by yourself in a car." Still, he could hear her walking somewhere. Footsteps, a door. "I got Lily a cookie from the place. She's going to be very sticky." "She's always sticky," he said. "Something about 5-year-olds. I'll be back in 20 minutes. He hung up and went back to the Honda and let the morning settle back into its ordinary shape. But there was something different now in the quality of the afternoon that was coming, some shift in the air pressure of the next few days, the ones ahead of them that felt less like uncertainty and more like something waiting to be walked into. He couldn't have named it exactly. He didn't try. He just changed the oil and checked the brakes and put it on the invoice and kept working, the way you do when you've learned that the next thing reveals itself better when you're not standing still waiting for it. The cookie was chocolate chip, and Lily ate it in 4 bites, and then was, as predicted, extremely sticky. Sophie came back to the apartment with the cookie bag and a second coffee she'd gotten for Ethan, which she brought down to the garage and set on the workbench without ceremony. He was still on the Honda. She sat on the stool in the corner, the same one she'd used 2 days ago, and she looked different than she had when she left. Not lighter exactly, but like something that had been torqued too tight had been given a quarter turn of release. Not fixed, just less likely to snap. "He asked if I was having personal problems," she said. Ethan looked up from the undercarriage. "Randall?" "Yes." He said it the way men of a certain generation say it. Like personal problems is a category that includes everything from a difficult divorce to a complete psychological unraveling, and he's not going to specify because specifying would require him to have an actual conversation. "What'd you say?" "I said I was reassessing my priorities." She picked up the coffee cup she'd brought for herself and held it. He nodded like that explained everything, and also like he hoped I'd get my priorities reassessed before the next billing cycle. Ethan slid out from under the car. "But he gave you the deal." "He gave me the deal." She said it simply, without triumph, which means for the next 60 days I have a clear set of tasks, and after that I have a renegotiated contract, and the freedom to structure my own caseload. She paused. It's not the end of anything. It's just different. I get to decide what different looks like. He nodded, picked up the coffee she'd brought him. It was still hot. How do you feel? She thought about it honestly, which he appreciated. She didn't give him the reflexive fine or the performance of relief. Scared, she said, and also like I can breathe again, both at the same time. That's probably right, he said. Upstairs, through the floor, they could both hear Lily singing something to herself. One of those songs that was half real lyrics and half words she'd invented because they fit the tune better. It drifted down in fragments, tuneless and confident in the way only children and people who don't care what you think can be tuneless and confident. Sophie tilted her head, listening, a small smile. She's been singing that all morning. She sings when she's happy, Ethan said, or when she's stalling. You learn to tell the difference. Which one is that? Happy, he said. Stalling has more volume. Sophie laughed, the real one, and then caught it, brought it back, in the way people do when they're not quite sure they have permission to feel as okay as they suddenly feel. The week moved differently after that. Not slowly, not quickly, just with a different quality, like it had stopped holding its breath. Sophie dealt with her work obligations in measured increments. She was on calls in the morning, usually out on the back landing with the door half open, and he could hear her voice from the garage. Controlled, precise. The professional register that was clearly a real part of her, even if it wasn't all of her. She handled the Dallas transition with the focused competence of someone who, whatever their crisis of identity, was still extremely good at the actual work. Files transferred, meetings scheduled. Her teammates, she mentioned them by name once, a woman named Priya and a younger guy named Theo, she made sure were not left in a difficult position. He noticed that about her. Even walking away, she was careful about who she left behind. The afternoons were different. The afternoons she seemed to remember that she wasn't in Dallas. She came down to the garage most days around 2, sometimes earlier. She didn't pretend to be interested in cars the way some people did. The performance of curiosity that was really just something to do with your hands while you made conversation. She was genuinely not interested in the mechanical side, and she was honest about that. But she liked the garage itself in a way that surprised him. The routine of it, the physical concreteness, the fact that every problem had an actual solution that either worked or didn't. It's satisfying, she said one afternoon, watching him diagnose an electrical fault on a delivery van. The way you just know where to look. I don't always know, he said. Sometimes you just work through the possibilities until something makes sense. That's what I mean, though. There's a logic to it. You eliminate things. In my work, you can eliminate everything and still not know if the answer you're left with is right. She leaned against the bay door. I used to like that ambiguity. I thought it was interesting. Now I find it exhausting. What changed? She considered it. I stopped trusting the people I was supposed to resolve it with. She said it like she'd figured this out recently and was still getting comfortable with having figured it out. When you trust the people around you, ambiguity is just a problem you're working on together. When you don't, it's just exposure. It's just standing in the open, hoping nobody notices you don't have the answer. He looked at her. The people at your firm? Some of them. Randall's a fair person, actually. I don't think he's ever been dishonest with me. But there are people below him and above the people below him, and it's... She made a gesture that suggested an architecture too complicated to render in words. It's fine. I made the decision. I'm not relitigating it. I'm just explaining what it felt like. You don't have to explain. I know. I want to. But she looked at him directly. I've been not explaining things to people for about 4 years, and it hasn't worked out particularly well. He held her gaze for a second. Then he went back to the electrical fault. Hand me the multimeter. It's on the shelf behind you. She handed it over without fumbling, which meant she'd been paying more attention to where things lived in the garage than she'd let on. Marcus came back on Saturday with the Chevelle and the rear exhaust noise, and he and Ethan spent most of the morning on it. Sophie took Lily to the farmer's market up the street. This was Lily's idea, pitched as a diplomatic initiative involving the possibility of peaches. And they were gone for 2 hours and came back with peaches, a bunch of basil that Lily had chosen because she liked the smell, and a small painted stone that Lily had bought from a kid at one of the tables with the $2 she'd had in her pocket. Marcus watched them come through the bay door. He looked at Ethan. He didn't say anything, which with Marcus was its own form of saying something. "Don't," Ethan said. "I wasn't going to say anything." "You were thinking it loud." Marcus looked back at Sophie, who was crouching down to let Lily show him the painted stone up close, and then back at Ethan. "She seems good," he said. "She is good." "For you or in general?" Ethan gave him a look. Marcus returned to the Chevelle. But the question sat in the afternoon with him after Marcus left, patient as a stone in a shoe. Because the honest answer, the one he hadn't let himself phrase cleanly, was that Sophie was good in a way that wasn't separate from what it did to him to have her around. Those things were not cleanly distinguishable. He'd understood this since approximately the second morning, when he'd come into the kitchen and she'd already made coffee and was standing at the window in his old t-shirt with her hair undone, and something in him had gone very quiet in a way that had nothing to do with the morning being peaceful. He was not going to do anything with that. It wasn't the right time. It wasn't the right framework. She was here because she was figuring out her life, and inserting himself into that figuring as anything other than a steady presence was exactly the kind of thing that would make him the wrong kind of person. So he kept it filed somewhere deep and continued being the steady presence and trusted that the rest of it would either resolve itself or it wouldn't. That evening, Sophie made dinner, which she announced she was going to do, and then had to ask where most things were because she hadn't cooked in 2 months, and even before that, she'd mostly ordered in. She made pasta, and it was almost overcooked, but not quite, and there was too much garlic in the sauce, which turned out to be not a problem because Ethan liked garlic, and Lily, after one suspicious taste, decided she liked it too and ate more than she usually did. "This is good," Lily said, meaning it. "You don't have to be nice," Sophie said. "I'm not being nice, I'm being honest." Lily looked at her levelly. "Daddy says there's a difference." "Your dad's right," Sophie said. "I know." Lily twirled pasta onto her fork with more ambition than technique. "He's usually right." Ethan said nothing. He was looking at the table, the plates, the bread he'd cut and put in the middle, the basil Sophie had roughly torn and scattered over the pasta because she'd seen someone do it once and thought it looked good, which it did. The ordinary weight of a dinner table set for 3. It had a shape to it that he hadn't let himself name and kept not naming. After Lily was in bed, he and Sophie cleaned up the kitchen together, which went faster than it would have gone alone, even though she didn't know where things went and he had to redirect her twice. There was a rhythm to it anyway, a comfortable overlap of tasks that happens when people are naturally spatially aware of each other. She was drying a pot when she said, without preamble, "Tell me about Jamie." He kept his hands in the dishwater. "What do you want to know?" "Whatever you want to say. You mentioned her when you were explaining the anger, and you've never really talked about her otherwise." He rinsed a plate, set it in the rack. "We met when I was 26. She was doing marketing for a company that had its fleet here. We dated for about 8 months, which was probably 4 months longer than we should have, and then we got married, it wasn't a good decision, but I understood it at the time. We were both in that place where it felt like the next step, and neither of us was honest about whether we actually wanted the same things." He paused. "She got pregnant, and we were both genuinely happy about it, which surprised us both, I think. Lily was not a problem. Lily was the one part that was real." "When did she leave?" "Lily was 9 months old. Jamie had been unhappy for a while. Not with Lily, with the life. The apartment, the garage, She'd had different ideas about what things would look like. I understood that later better than I did at the time." He pulled the stopper from the drain, dried his hands. "She's in Phoenix now. Has a good job, a partner, a life that works for her. She sees Lily 4 times a year." Sophie was watching him. "And that's enough? For Lily?" "It's what there is." He turned to face her. "Lily knows her mom loves her. She also knows her mom lives somewhere else and they video call on Sundays. She's 5. She's adapting to the information she has. The grief will come later when she's old enough to want more than what's available. I'm not looking forward to that conversation." Sophie set the pot down. "Do you still feel anything about it? About Jamie?" "No," he said, and it was honest. I felt things for a long time. Now it's just Lily's history and mine. It's not a wound anymore. It's more like a scar. You know it's there, but it doesn't change what your hand can do." Sophie looked at him steadily. He felt, again, the particular quality of being seen by someone who had a prior version to measure against, and the specific unsteadiness that came with not knowing what that measurement was producing. "I think I owe you an honesty," she said. "You don't owe me anything. I want to tell you something." She picked up the dish towel, set it on the counter. Something in her posture changed, not stiff but deliberate. "When I was driving down here, when I was thinking about the hill and the crackers and all of that," she held his eyes, "I wasn't just thinking about the place or the feeling. I was thinking about you specifically." A pause. "I want you to know that I know that. And I'm not saying it to start something or to make things complicated. I'm saying it because I've been not honest with myself about it for a long time, and I don't want to keep doing that." He was quiet. "You don't have to respond," she said. "I'm not asking you to respond." "I know," he said. She nodded, picked the dish towel back up, folded it, and set it on the rack. "I'm going to take a walk," she said. "I won't be long." After she left, he stood in the kitchen for a moment. Then he went to the back steps and sat down in the dark and thought about the particular weight of honesty offered without asking anything back, how rare it was, and how it had its own kind of pressure despite everything. But he couldn't have said exactly when things shifted between them. It wasn't a moment. It was a series of ordinary things that accumulated their own meaning. The way she started knowing without asking where the coffee filters were, the way she picked up Lily's dropped things without being asked, the way their conversations in the evening stopped leaving spaces where one of them was still being careful about what they said. She'd found an apartment she liked, her own place, 2 miles from the garage, a second-floor unit with a decent kitchen and windows that got morning light. She'd signed the lease on Thursday and told him over dinner, matter-of-factly, and Lily had looked very serious about it and asked how far away 2 miles was. "About a 10-minute drive," Sophie said. "That's not far," Lily said. "No, it's not far." "Can you still come for dinner?" "If your dad invites me," Sophie said and glanced at Ethan. "She can come?" Lily told Ethan, in case this needed to be clarified. "I know," Ethan said. It was a Saturday evening 3 weeks after she'd arrived when they were sitting on the back steps again. The same steps, the same blue dark, the same temperature of beer in his hand. And Sophie had her knees pulled up and was looking at the sky above the roofline, which wasn't a sky you could see many stars in because of the city light, but you could see the ones that were bright enough to cut through. She'd been talking about Priya, the woman on her team in Dallas, who'd sent her a long email that day, not about work, just checking in. It had surprised her, Sophie said. She'd assumed the team would be angry about the departure, and some of them probably were, but Priya had just written, "How are you doing? I think what you did took more courage than most of us would have. I wanted you to know that." "I didn't know she thought that," Sophie said. "We worked together for 2 years and I didn't know that about her." "You were probably both performing," Ethan said. "Probably." She was quiet for a moment. "I think I spent most of my career performing competence for people who were also performing it, and we all just kept the performance going because nobody wanted to be the first one to admit they were tired." She looked at the sky. "I'm not even sure I was tired. I think I just stopped believing in the performance." He turned the beer bottle in his hands. "What do you believe in instead?" She considered it for a while, long enough that he thought she might not answer. "This," she said, not dramatically, just the word, plainly. "Dinner, the ladybug habitat, the cookie from the bakery on Congress." She paused. "You." He looked at her. She was already looking at him. She'd been looking at him, he realized, for longer than the sentence. She'd been turned toward him for a while, and he'd only just caught up to it. "I know the timing isn't," she started. "Sophie, I know it's complicated, and I've been here 3 weeks, and it would be very easy to say this is just—" "Sophie," he said it quietly, not to stop her, just to make her slow down enough to hear herself. She stopped, took a breath. "I know," she said, softer. I needed you to know that I know what this is, that it's not the situation.
That it's not because I was driving and I was scared and this was the first familiar thing. She held his gaze. I've known you since I was 9 years old, and every relationship I've had since has come up short against a standard I didn't understand until about 2 weeks ago. He was quiet for a long moment. The city moved around them. A car somewhere, a dog, a neighbor's television through an open window. I'm not a simple situation, he said finally. I know. Lily, I know, Ethan. I'm not asking you to decide anything right now. Her voice was steady, but he could see in the set of her jaw that the steadiness was something she was holding rather than something that came naturally to her in this moment. I'm telling you where I am, that's all. He looked at her for a long time, the back step dark, the city light blurring the stars overhead, the warmth of the Texas night still in the air like something that had never quite finished being the day. I know where you are, he said. She held his eyes. Okay. It wasn't a resolution. It wasn't the thing that things had been building toward in any clean narrative way. Because real things don't tend to arrive that cleanly. They arrive sideways and incomplete, and asking you to hold them before you know what you're holding. But something between them settled. Some held breath, finally let go. They sat there for a while longer, in the not-quite silence of the night, not touching, not saying anything else. The back steps were metal and they swayed slightly in the wind, same as they always did. A truck went by below them, bass thumping once and then gone. Ethan finished the beer. Sophie looked at the sky through the yellow city light. Upstairs, through the window, the nightlight in Lily's room made a blue rectangle at the edge of the curtain. The small, steady signal of a child sleeping. He didn't say anything about what came next. He didn't have to. Some things get to settle before they get to be spoken, and this was that kind of thing. He knew what he felt. He'd known for longer than he'd admitted to himself, which was its own kind of honesty. The night held everything right where it was, and for once, that was enough. He didn't sleep well that night, which was fine because he hadn't expected to. He lay in the dark with his hands behind his head and went over the conversation the way you do with something you can't put down. Not obsessively, just carefully, the way you'd handle something that might be delicate. Sophie's voice on the back steps. Every relationship I've had since has come up short against a standard I didn't understand until about 2 weeks ago. The steadiness she'd been holding while she said it. The fact that she hadn't asked him for anything. Just told him where she was and let it sit there. He thought about what it meant to be someone's standard, the particular weight of that. He wasn't afraid of it. That surprised him slightly. He'd expected something like fear, or the self-protective instinct he'd developed over the years of keeping things manageable, keeping his life in the lane it fit in. But what he felt instead was something more like being very still in a room where something important had been placed on the table, and knowing that the right response to that was not to rush toward it or away from it, but to stay where you were and look at it clearly. By 4 a.m, he'd accepted that sleep wasn't happening, and he got up and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table in the quiet. The apartment breathed around him, Lily's nightlight making its blue line under her door, the refrigerator humming, the distant sound of the city doing its insomniac thing. He drank the coffee and thought about Lily. He always came back to Lily, not because she was a complication, but because she was the first thing. The first person he had to be honest with himself about, because she couldn't afford for him not to be. She already loved Sophie. He'd been watching it happen for 3 weeks in the incremental, matter-of-fact way that children attach themselves to people who show up consistently and treat them like their observations matter. It wasn't a calculated attachment. Lily didn't have the circuitry for that yet. It was just the straightforward result of Sophie being genuinely present, teaching her to make the pasta sauce, letting her pick the park route, reading the Ladybug book a 5th time when Ethan had quietly excused himself after the 4th, sitting with her seriousness instead of deflecting it. That was the thing that got him, he realized. Sophie didn't manage Lily the way most adults manage children. The benign performance of interest, the slightly elevated voice. The answers shaped more toward ending the question than actually engaging it. Sophie answered Lily's questions like they were real questions. Because they were real questions, and Sophie seemed to understand that even when the question was about which direction a ladybug's spots went. He drank the rest of the coffee, went back to bed, lay there until the alarm. Sophie moved her things into the new apartment on a Sunday. There wasn't much,
She'd been living lean since arriving in Austin, her real belongings still in a storage unit in Houston that she'd need to sort out eventually. What she had fit in her car and 2 bags, Ethan helped carry up the stairs. The apartment was on the 2nd floor of a converted house near Bolden Creek. Hardwood floors, tall windows, the kind of place that would look good once there was furniture in it and currently looked like an echo chamber. Lily walked through it with her arms out, testing the acoustics. "It's empty," Lily announced. "That's because I don't have furniture yet," Sophie said. "Where do you sleep?" "I have a sleeping bag." Lily stared at her. "Like camping?" "Like camping, yes." This seemed to elevate the entire situation in Lily's estimation. "Can I sleep here sometime, like camping?" "Maybe when there's something other than floor," Sophie said. "I like floor." Lily said it with conviction. "Floor is good for somersaults." She demonstrated, narrowly missing the wall. Sophie looked at Ethan. He shrugged. "She's not wrong about the somersaults." He helped her with what he could. A bookshelf that needed assembling, a curtain rod in the bedroom, a kitchen drawer that was sticking on its track. She made him lunch with what she had, which was bread and peanut butter, and the last of the peaches from the farmer's market, and they sat on the floor of the empty living room and ate it while Lily did somersaults at a safe distance and periodically reported on the quality of each one. It felt, weirdly, like something he hadn't felt in a long time. Uncomplicated. Not in the sense of easy. It wasn't easy. There was still the unresolved weight of what she'd said on the steps and what he'd said back and what neither of them had said yet, but uncomplicated in the sense of this is just what this is. 2 people on the floor of an empty apartment eating peaches and bread while a 5-year-old practiced gymnastics. Nothing performing itself as something bigger. "I'm going to get a couch," Sophie said. "That's first." "What color?" Lily called from across the room. "Maybe blue?" Lily considered this during a somersault. "Green is better." "Why?" "I just think so." "I'll take it under advisement," Sophie said, and caught Ethan's eye, and they both didn't quite smile at the same time, which was almost better than smiling. Shut. The complication arrived on a Wednesday. He'd known it was coming in an abstract sense. Sophie's life before Austin hadn't disappeared just because she'd renegotiated her relationship to it, and the people in it weren't all going to take the renegotiation quietly. But he hadn't anticipated the specific shape of it, which was a man named Derek Cho. Sophie mentioned him first offhandedly, while she was at the garage one afternoon. She'd been spending more time there again now that the Dallas transition work was tapering off. Derek was a partner at a firm she'd worked with 2 years ago, she said. He was going to be in Austin next week and wanted to have dinner. "Old colleague," she said. It was nothing. Ethan didn't say anything about it. He had no standing to say anything about it. He filed it where he filed things that were not yet his business and kept working. He met Derek on a Thursday evening when Derek, apparently not content to leave things at dinner, showed up at the coffee shop where Sophie was working and then proceeded to walk Sophie back to her car, which happened to be parked near the garage. And Sophie brought him over because she was Sophie, and she was still learning how to manage the intersection of her old life and her new one without defaulting to the instinct that said everyone needed to know everyone. Derek Cho was about Ethan's age, wore a suit without the jacket in a way that looked practiced, and had the handshake of someone who'd been told once that a firm handshake was important and had been doing it with conscious effort ever since. He looked at the garage with a specific kind of neutral expression that managed to communicate very clearly that he'd never thought about car repair as a profession before. "Good to meet you," Derek said. "Sophie talks about you." "Good things, I hope," Ethan said, the standard response. "Of course." A smile that didn't quite make it to his eyes. He looked around the bay. "You own this place?" "Yeah." "Nice." The word meant nothing, which was possibly what it was meant to mean. Sophie was watching both of them with the expression of someone who had made a small miscalculation and was now managing its consequences. She was doing it well. She had good social management instincts, but Ethan knew her well enough now to see the slight tension at the corners of her eyes. Derek stayed about 10 minutes. He had things to get to, he said. He and Sophie had plans for Friday, he mentioned, with a casualness that was not entirely casual. It was the kind of remark that was really a flag. "I am here. I exist in her life. Note that." Ethan noted it and kept his face even. After Derek left, Sophie stood in the bay doorway and didn't say anything for a moment. "Old colleague," Ethan said. Yes.
Seemed very collegial. She looked at him. Don't do that. What? The flat voice? You do that when you're keeping something in. He set down the wrench. What do you want me to say, Sophie? I don't know. Something real. He was quiet for a moment. Were you two? It was brief, she said. About 18 months ago. It wasn't serious. It ended without much drama because neither of us was particularly invested. She held his eyes. He thinks it might start again. I haven't said yes to that. But you haven't said no. She didn't answer immediately, which was its own answer. I'm trying to be honest with you, she said. I could have not told you about him. I'm telling you because I don't want to not tell you things. He appreciated that. He did. He also appreciated that it felt like a small fishhook in the soft part of his chest, which was useful information about himself. You should have dinner on Friday, he said. You should figure out what you want.
She looked at him for a long moment. I know what I want. Then that should be an easy dinner, he said. She opened her mouth, closed it. Then she said, You're not going to make this easy, are you? I'm not trying to make it hard. He picked the wrench back up. I have Lily to think about. I can't do something halfway. If you're working out what you want by having a Friday dinner with Derek, that's fine. Take the time you need. But I can't be something you come back to after you've decided, as though the deciding was separate from me. He said it without heat, just the fact of it. Lily's already... He stopped. She already looks for you. You need to understand what that means before anything else changes. Sophie's expression shifted. The thing he said about Lily landing somewhere specific. She was quiet for a long moment. I know what it means, she said. I've known for a while. Okay. She looked at him. Are you angry? No. He exhaled. I'm being careful. I'm allowed to be careful. Yes, she said. You are. She straightened up from the doorframe. I'll tell you how Friday goes. You don't have to. I want to, she said, which was what she always said, and it was always true. Friday came and went. She texted him at 9:15. Home. You were right. Easy dinner. He read it in the kitchen after Lily was asleep. Put the phone down. Picked it back up. Typed, You okay? Her response, Yeah. Can I call you? He called her instead. She picked up on the second ring and she sounded like herself. Not upset, not relieved in any performed way, just clear. The way she sounded when she'd come back from the meeting with Randall. I told him I was seeing someone, she said. He was quiet for a second. Are you? I think I am. A pause. Is that okay? Is it accurate? He said. I think so. Another pause. I want it to be accurate. He looked at the ring stain on the coffee table, the one he'd tried to sand out. Lily's going to want to know what it means, he said. She's going to ask me questions I don't have tidy answers for. I know. And I'm going to have to explain things I don't fully have language for yet. I know, Ethan. And you're going to move slowly with me, he said, not because of me, because of her. Because she's the one who can get hurt here in a way that doesn't heal the same as adult hurt. I understand that. Sophie's voice was quiet but steady. I would never... I know you wouldn't mean to. He said it gently. I'm just saying what it is. She was quiet on the other end. He could hear her breathing, the ambient sound of her apartment, probably still mostly empty, the echo of hard floors. I know what I signed up for, she said. I signed up for all of it. The early mornings and the Ladybug book and the conversations where she asks me things I don't know how to answer. I signed up for complicated. A beat. I'm not a person who wants simple anymore. I thought I did. I don't. He sat back in the chair. Something in his chest was doing the thing it did when he'd been holding something carefully for a long time and was only now noticing the weight had shifted. Come over tomorrow, he said. For what? Marcus is bringing the Chevelle back. He's been working on the interior, and he wants someone to tell him whether the upholstery looks right. You have better eyes for that than I do. She was quiet for a moment. That's a very specific reason to invite someone over. Lily also wants you to help finish the last panel on the habitat. She's been saving it. Also specific. Take it or leave it, he said. He could hear her smile through the phone. Not the performed one, not the almost one. The real one. I'll be there at 9, she said. After they hung up, he sat in the quiet for a while. The apartment felt different in the way it had been feeling different for 3 weeks. Like it had more people in it than were physically present, like it was used to more than it used to be. He wasn't sure when that had happened. He suspected it had happened the night 3 hesitant knocks had come through the door, and he'd opened it to find Sophie Carter on his landing, looking like someone who had driven 4 hours and was only just now stopping. He got up and rinsed his glass and turned off the lights, and checked that Lily was breathing, which he always did. And on the way back past Lily's room, he paused in the doorway for a second, just to look. She was on her side with one arm hanging off the edge of the mattress, and her mouth slightly open and the old soul face doing its slightly troubled brow thing. He'd always thought it was an expression that knew something he didn't. He'd always found that comforting, which probably wasn't rational. He went to bed, and he slept. Marcus arrived at 10 with the Chevelle and a bag of kolaches from the place on South First, because Marcus always brought food when he felt like a visit was going to involve him having feelings about things. He'd restored the Chevelle's interior himself over 18 months. New bench seat in dark red, new door panels, the dash refinished in something that matched what it would have been in 1972. He was unreasonably proud of it in the quiet, understated way he was unreasonably proud of everything he cared about. Sophie walked around it twice without saying anything, which Marcus watched with the expression of a man trying not to look like he cared about the verdict. "The stitching on the seat," she finally said. "Is that original pattern?" Marcus exhaled. "Close as I could get. Had to find somebody in San Marcos who still did it that way. It's really good." She crouched down and looked at the door panel. "The color reads a little darker in this light, which I think actually works. Inside of the car is going to feel bigger for it." Marcus looked at Ethan. Ethan ate a kolache and said nothing. "You think so?" Marcus said to Sophie. "The eye goes to the window when the door panel's dark. Makes the space feel more open." She stood up. "It's beautiful work, genuinely." Marcus nodded slowly, doing the thing where he absorbed a compliment by appearing not to. "You know cars?" "No," she said. "I know color, and I know when something's been done with actual care versus done to get it done." She looked at the Chevelle. This was done with care. Marcus looked at Ethan again. This time Ethan met his eyes. Marcus said nothing but what he thought was loud enough that it barely needed saying. Lily came down the garage stairs at that point, having decided that whatever was happening in the garage was more interesting than the cartoon she'd been watching. She walked up to the Chevelle, inspected it gravely, and said, "Is it done?" "Getting there," Marcus said. "It's red," she said. "Dark red," Marcus corrected. Lily tipped her head. "Like a ladybug," she said. Marcus looked down at her. Then he laughed. A real one, Marcus-sized, which was the kind that took up most of the room. "Yeah," he said, "like a ladybug." Lily seemed satisfied with this and went to stand next to Sophie, who reached down without thinking and tucked a loose piece of Lily's hair back behind her ear. And Lily leaned slightly into the gesture the way she did when she was comfortable with someone's hands near her, a small unconscious adjustment toward warmth. Ethan watched it. He took another bite of the kolache and watched it and didn't say anything, and whatever the thing in his chest was doing it loudly enough that Marcus caught it from 6 feet away, because Marcus glanced at him once and then looked pointedly at the sky and then at the Chevelle engine and said loudly to nobody, "Anyway, I should probably check that exhaust mount while I'm here," which was the Marcus equivalent of giving someone the room. That afternoon, after Marcus left and Lily was inside and the garage was quiet, Sophie found Ethan in the back of the bay reorganizing the tool chest, which was something he did when he needed to do something with his hands that didn't require thinking. She leaned against the chest beside him and watched for a moment. "Can I say something?" "Go ahead." "I know you're being careful," she said. "I know you're doing that because it's the right thing to do, and because you're the kind of person who does the right thing even when it's inconvenient." She paused. "But I need you to know that I'm not going to disappear." I need you to know that's not a thing I'm capable of anymore. I came back because there was something here I'd never replaced, and I couldn't keep pretending that was okay. She looked at him directly. I'm not asking you to stop being careful. I'm asking you to be careful with the full understanding that I'm staying. He was looking at the socket drawer. Not because it was more interesting than Sophie, nothing in the garage was more interesting than Sophie, but because sometimes you needed somewhere to put your eyes while you felt something. I don't know how to do this, he said. I've been by myself for 4 years. I know how to do that. I know. And I'm not... He stopped. Tried again. I'm not a person who's good at wanting things. I'm better at managing what's already there. I know that too, she said. You don't have to be good at it. You just have to not keep it in the drawer with the socket sets. He looked at her then, and she was already watching him with that expression she sometimes had, fierce and uncertain in the same breath, the one he'd seen since they were teenagers on a hill behind the middle school, the one that meant she'd made up her mind but she wasn't sure the world had caught up yet. He put the socket set down. Sophie, he said. Yeah, I'm not good at this. I know. And you're going to have to be patient with me while I figure it out. I'm aware, she said. And Lily, Ethan. Her voice was gentle but firm, the voice she'd learned somewhere between raising herself and arriving on his doorstep. I know. Say the last thing. He looked at her for a long moment. The garage was quiet around them. Outside, the Saturday street was doing its ordinary thing. A kid on a bike, a car going by slow, someone's radio 3 blocks over. I don't want to do this halfway, he said. If we're doing this, we're doing it. Yes, she said. That's what I want. He exhaled, long and slow, the way you exhale when you've been carrying something in a cramped position for too long and you finally put it down somewhere it can actually rest. Okay, he said. It wasn't a romantic declaration. It wasn't the kind of thing you'd write down or remember the exact phrasing of later. It was just a word that meant yes, and I'm scared, and I'm in all at once. And she heard all 3 parts of it because she was Sophie, and she'd always known how to hear what he meant underneath what he said. She nodded. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then she said, Lily saved the last panel of the habitat. I know. She's going to want us both there for it. Yeah, he said. He picked the socket set back up, put it in the right slot this time. Give me 10 minutes to close up. She went upstairs. He closed the bay door, checked the locks, turned off the compressor. 10 minutes, more or less. He climbed the stairs the way he always did. The sway of the metal steps, the sound of the city below, the light from the apartment window above. And pushed through the door into the kitchen where Lily was already at the table with the habitat box and Sophie was reading the final panel instructions with the serious concentration of someone approaching something important. Daddy, Lily said, without looking up from the box. You're late. I'm exactly on time, he said. The instructions say both helpers need to be here for the last part, Lily said. She pointed at the page. It says so. Sophie looked up at him over Lily's head. He looked back at her. Neither of them said anything. Lily was already handing out the pieces, allocating responsibilities with the authority of someone who had planned this for days and was finally seeing it through. He sat down. He picked up his piece. He stayed. The ladybug habitat sat on the kitchen windowsill for 3 weeks before Lily decided it needed a name. She announced this at breakfast on a Tuesday, with the conviction of someone who had been thinking about it for some time and had finally arrived at a conclusion. I'm going to call it the Bug House, she said. That's very literal, Sophie said. I know. Lily ate a spoonful of cereal. But it's what it is. Ethan, over his coffee, said nothing. He'd learned that Lily's naming conventions were not open for negotiation. She'd named a rock she found in the parking lot Gerald. She'd named the crack in the kitchen wall Steve. The habitat was going to be the Bug House, and that was the end of it. Sophie caught his eye across the table. He looked back at her. They both didn't smile at the same time, which had become a whole private language between them over the months. All the things they communicated by almost doing something rather than doing it. It had been 11 months since she'd knocked on his door. The thing about time, when it's going well, is that you stop measuring it the same way. The first weeks had been counted in days. She'd been here 3 days, a week, 2 weeks. Because uncertainty makes you precise, makes you track progress like you're monitoring something that might disappear. But then the precision softened, the way it does when something stops being a question and starts being a condition of your life. And somewhere around the 3-month mark, Ethan had realized he'd stopped doing the math. She'd built her apartment into something real. The couch was green. Lily had been consulted and had not let the issue go. And there was a kitchen table with 4 chairs, even though she mostly ate at Ethan's. And she had a bookshelf that was getting full with the books she'd always meant to read when she had more time and was now reading because she'd restructured what more time meant. Her work was different now. She'd spent the 60 days of the transition doing exactly what she'd told Randall she would do. Clean handoffs, thorough documentation, nothing left unfinished. And Priya had sent her a long email at the end of it that said, among other things, "You showed me something about what integrity actually looks like in this industry, and I'm not going to forget it." Sophie had read that email at Ethan's kitchen table and cried without announcing she was crying, and he'd put a hand on her shoulder and then gone back to cutting vegetables because she didn't need him to make a moment of it. She just needed him to be there while it happened. She'd started her own practice. Small, deliberately small, because she was done with the scale that required her to compromise her judgment to maintain it. She had 4 clients, all of them in sectors she found genuinely interesting, and she worked from her apartment in the mornings and from a shared office space near South Congress 2 afternoons a week. She made less money than she had in Dallas. She slept better than she had in 10 years. She and Ethan had not made any declarations. There were no conversations about what this was or where it was going, not because they were avoiding the subject, but because they'd both arrived, at different speeds, at the understanding that some things don't need to be named to be real. They were in each other's lives, fully, consistently, without the performance of being in each other's lives. He came over when she cooked. She came over when he couldn't get a sitter. She'd been there when Lily had a stomach bug in February and had held Lily's hair back without being asked and cleaned up without being asked and stayed on the couch that night because neither of them thought to suggest she go home. That was when Ethan had understood that the word for what this was not a word he needed to introduce. It was already there. It had been there for months, maybe longer, maybe since a hill behind a middle school, if you wanted to trace it back that far. The complication that remained, because there's always something, was Lily's mother. Jamie called every Sunday. The calls lasted 15 to 30 minutes, and Lily took them in her room with the door closed, which was a boundary Ethan had set when Lily was 3 and still held because it gave Lily a space for that relationship that was hers alone and didn't require her to manage anyone else's feelings about it. He didn't listen. He made coffee or worked on something in the garage and let the call be what it was. In March, Jamie called him directly. It was a Thursday evening, and he could tell from the first second that she'd thought about the call before making it, which meant it was about something that required preparation. "Lily mentioned Sophie," Jamie said. "Okay," he said. "She mentioned her a lot, like, she talked about her for about half the call last week. Sophie's around. She and Lily are close." A beat. "Is this serious?" He thought about how to answer that. "It's real," he said. "If that's what you're asking." Another beat, longer. "Okay." Jamie's voice was careful, the voice of someone navigating a conversation they'd thought about from multiple angles. I want to know if someone's going to be significant in her life. I'd want to know about something like that." "You know about it," he said. "I'm telling you now." "What's she like?" He considered it. "Good to Lily, patient. She doesn't try to be something she's not with her." He paused. "She's been my friend since we were 9. I trust her." Another long beat. "Okay," Jamie said again, and this time it sounded like she meant it in a different way. Not resolved exactly, but adjusted, making room. "I appreciate you telling me." "Yeah," he said. After the call, he sat in the kitchen for a while. He didn't feel bad about it. It had been an honest conversation, and Jamie's concern was reasonable, and he respected it. But it made the whole thing feel more concrete, that conversation. Like it was now something that existed in the world beyond the two of them, and Lily, documented, acknowledged. He called Sophie. She picked up on the first ring. "Jamie called," he said. "I know," she said. "Lily called me after." He stopped. Lily called you? She wanted to tell me her mom knew about me. A pause. She seemed like she needed to tell someone. I think it mattered to her that the people in her life all knew about each other. He was quiet for a second. What did she say? She said, "What, Sophie, my mom knows you're my friend." And I said, "I know, Bug." And she said, "Good." And then she told me about a caterpillar she'd seen at school and then said she had to go because dinner was almost ready. He sat with that for a moment. The particular weight of a 6-year-old's version of making sure everyone was accounted for, making sure the map of her world was coherent, that no one was in a separate pocket that the others didn't know about. "She called you Bug," he said. "She started doing it last month. I wasn't sure if I should tell you." "Why wouldn't you tell me?" "I didn't know if—" She paused. "I didn't know how you'd feel about it." He looked at the ring stain on the coffee table, the one he'd tried to sand out and couldn't. He'd stopped trying. It was just part of the table now. "How I'd feel about my daughter having a name for you." "Having a name for someone is a kind of claim," Sophie said quietly. "I didn't want to presume." "Sophie," he said. "Yeah." "She named a rock Gerald." A long pause. Then the real laugh. The one that snuck up on her. The one he'd loved since they were kids. And she said through it, "That's not the same thing." "It's absolutely not the same thing," he agreed. "You're more important than Gerald." "That's an extremely low bar." "You clear it significantly," he said. She was quiet for a moment, then, "Ethan." "Yeah." "I love her." She said it simply, without lead-up or apology. "I just want to say that. Not as a statement about what I want from you, just, I love that kid, and I wanted to say it out loud to someone who should know." He closed his eyes for a second, opened them. "I know," he said. "She loves you too. I know she does." A beat. I just needed to say the other direction of it. He understood that. He understood it specifically because he'd been having his own version of that. The feeling that needed to move in a direction, that accumulated until you had to let it out somewhere, or it would press against something important. He was still working on that. He was getting closer to not working on it. "Come over tomorrow," he said. "Lily wants to show you something she made at school." "What is it?" "I don't know. She won't tell me. She says it's for Sophie only." Sophie made a soft sound he recognized as the almost smile. "I'll be there at 6. The thing she'd made at school was a drawing, crayon, on the thick paper they used in kindergarten, and it depicted, as near as Ethan could interpret, 3 figures of varying heights standing in front of a rectangle that he understood to be the garage. The tallest figure had brown marks above his head that were clearly meant to be hair, or possibly a hat. The shortest figure had 2 yellow circles coming off her head, which were the pigtails, which Lily drew on her self-portraits consistently. The middle figure had long hair indicated by brown lines, and was holding hands with both of the others. Lily handed it to Sophie at the kitchen table with the gravity of an artist presenting a completed work. Sophie looked at it for a long time. "Is that us?" she said. "Yes," Lily said. "In front of the garage?" "Yes," Lily pointed. "That's Daddy. That's me. That's you." Sophie was quiet for a moment, and Ethan, who was standing in the kitchen doorway, watched something move through her face that wasn't one emotion, but several of them arriving simultaneously and being held with the same posture she brought to everything, fierce and uncertain, braced and open at once. "I love it," Sophie said. "You can keep it," Lily said. "I made it for you." "I know you did." Sophie's voice was careful in the way voices get when you're trying to keep something together. "Thank you, Bug." Lily nodded, satisfied. Then she slid off her chair and disappeared down the hallway to do whatever came next on her internal schedule, leaving Sophie at the table with the drawing. Ethan came in and sat down across from her. She was still looking at it. One of the figure's hands had 6 fingers on it because Lily was still negotiating with hands anatomically, but the gesture, 3 of them together, in front of the place where they kept returning to, was unmistakable. "You okay?" he said. "Yeah." She set the drawing down, looked at him. "No, I'm a little undone, actually." "That's fair."
A 6-year-old did what I've been trying not to do for 11 months, she said. She just drew it, the three of us. Like it was obvious. Like it wasn't a question. To her, it isn't a question, he said. Sophie looked at him steadily. Is it a question to you? He held her gaze. Outside the window, the afternoon was doing what Texas afternoons did in spring, going golden at the edges before it went to blue. The light coming sideways off the roofline, the way it had on that first morning she'd stood in his doorway. He'd noticed the light more since she'd been around. He wasn't sure why. Maybe because she paid attention to it and it had become contagious. No, he said. It's not a question. She looked at him for another moment. Then she picked up the drawing again and held it. I want to frame it, she said. Yeah, he said. You should. Summer came the way it always did in Austin. Without warning, a wall of heat that arrived one morning and simply stayed. Lily finished kindergarten with a ceremony that involved songs and paper crowns and a slideshow that made Mrs. Delgado cry so hard she had to leave the room briefly, and Ethan stood in the back of the school gymnasium with his phone out, taking photos he would look at approximately 10,000 times over the next week. Sophie was next to him. She'd been next to him when they walked in. She'd driven herself, met them at the entrance because she'd had a client call that ran long. And she'd taken Lily's backpack without being asked when Lily thrust it at her on the way into the gym, and they'd stood together in the back with Mrs. Delgado between them, all three of them watching Lily march in with her paper crown slightly askew and an expression of profound personal dignity. When Lily spotted them from the front, she waved, not the polite wave of a child being watched, the full-arm, whole-body wave of someone who wanted to make absolutely sure that the people she was looking for could see her. Ethan waved back. Sophie waved back. Mrs. Delgado waved, and then had to go find a tissue. After, in the parking lot, Lily put her paper crown on Sophie's head. This was not requested or discussed. She simply reached up and placed it there with the authority of someone who had decided something. It's yours, Lily said. Sophie looked cross-eyed at the crown. Are you sure? You need it more, Lily said, which made no sense, and also somehow made perfect sense, in the way that children sometimes land on phrasing that is accidental and exact at the same time. Sophie wore the crown all the way to the ice cream place they went to after. She did not take it off when people looked. Ethan sat across the table from her in a booth, eating a scoop of butter pecan, watching her try to eat a sundae with a paper crown on her head, while Lily told her with great seriousness about everything she'd learned in kindergarten, which turned out to be numbers, letters, that Gerald the rock was actually a mineral and not a rock specifically, and that caterpillars did not decide to become butterflies, they dissolved first and then rebuilt, which Lily described with a mix of horror and admiration. They dissolve? Sophie said. Completely, Lily confirmed. Into soup. And then they come back different. Sophie looked at the sundae. Then she looked at Ethan, and he looked at her, and neither of them said anything about it. But the thing they didn't say was loud enough to fill the booth, the whole ice cream shop, the whole ordinary summer afternoon. Oteb, he asked her in August. Not with a ring, not yet, that came later, but with the words, which felt like the more important thing. They were on the back steps, the same blue dark, because some conversations apparently belonged to that spot in a way that was not negotiable. Lily was asleep. The city was doing its summer night thing. He had a beer and she had a glass of water she'd brought from inside because she'd stopped drinking much in the heat. He'd been thinking about how to say it for about 2 weeks, which meant he'd thought himself in circles and come back around to the understanding that there was no version of this that benefited from being phrased carefully. There was just the thing that was true and the saying of it. I want to do this for good, he said. All of it. You and me and Lily. I want that to be the shape of things. Sophie was quiet for a moment. She had her knees pulled up the way she always did on these steps. Is that a question? She said. Yes. Say it like one. He looked at her. She was already looking at him with the old expression, fierce, uncertain, braced, open. The one she'd had since she was 12 years old on a hill behind the middle school. The one that meant she'd already decided, but she needed the other person to arrive at the station she was standing at. Will you stay? He said. Permanently, with us. She was quiet for 3 seconds. He counted. Yes, she said. Not of course, which would have been performing certainty she'd earned the hard way. Not I thought you'd never ask, which would have been deflection, just yes, the single word that meant all of it. He exhaled. She leaned her head against his shoulder, the first time she'd done that, and he felt the weight of it. Not heavy, not a burden, just the specific warmth of someone choosing to put their weight against you because they've decided you can hold it. They stayed on the steps for a while. The city moved below them, something on the street, a laugh from somewhere, a car going by slow. We should tell Lily in the morning, he said. She already knows, Sophie said. She doesn't know we… Ethan. Sophie's voice was quiet, almost amused. She drew us standing together in front of the garage 6 months ago. She's known this whole time. He thought about that. The drawing. He was quiet for a moment, then… She's 6. She's a very perceptive 6. He looked up at the sky, the blurred stars through the city light, the ones bright enough to cut through. He'd been looking at that same sky from these same steps since he moved in, and it had always been just sky, and now it was something else too, which was the strange math of what happens when your life gets bigger without getting louder. You know it's not going to be easy, he said. When did I say I wanted easy? You used to want easy. You had a whole framework for easy. I had a whole framework for something that looked like easy, she said. It was actually just controlled. Controlled and easy aren't the same thing. He nodded. This was true. What are you afraid of? She said. He thought about it honestly. That something goes wrong and you leave. That Lily loses someone else. I know, she said. She didn't dismiss it. That's a real thing to be afraid of. I can't promise you the future. I can only tell you that leaving is not something I'm capable of anymore. I used to be able to leave things. I was actually very good at leaving things. I left jobs and cities and people, and I told myself it was because I was moving forward. She paused. I drove 4 hours and knocked on your door at 11 o'clock at night because I was done moving forward into things that didn't matter. I don't have that direction in me anymore. He turned his head to look at her. She was looking up at the same half-visible stars. You know what I think? She said. Tell me. I think the bravest thing most people ever do is just stay. Not because there's no reason to leave, but because the thing in front of them is worth more than the distance. She paused. I wasn't good at that. I want to get good at it. He thought about the years before Sophie came back, the clean, managed shape of his life, the way he'd made peace with its smallness. Not because it was small, but because smallness was safe, because expansion required hope, and hope required risk. And he'd decided at some point that he was done with risk. He'd been surviving so efficiently that he'd almost forgotten it was different from living. And then 3 knocks on a door, and the whole quiet structure of his careful life had shifted without breaking, which turned out to be possible, which he would not have predicted. I used to think, he said, that the life I had was the life I was going to have, that I'd already made the choices that shaped things, and everything else was just maintenance. And now? Now Lily has a ladybug habitat, and a woman who wears paper crowns in ice cream shops, and I fix cars, and somehow that's… He stopped, tried again. It's more than I knew how to want. Sophie lifted her head from his shoulder and looked at him. In the blue dark, she looked exactly like herself, which sounds simple but wasn't. She'd spent years looking like the version of herself other people needed her to be. And somewhere in the past 11 months, she'd started looking like the original. The one that had sat on a hill with him eating cheese crackers, watching the light go sideways off the grass. That's the most you've ever said at one time, she said. Don't get used to it. She smiled. The real one, the full one, the one that came in before she was ready. Too late, she said. The ring came in October, a Saturday morning in the kitchen, which was not romantic and was exactly right. Lily was eating cereal. Sophie was on her second coffee. Ethan put a small box on the table between them and said, I wanted to do this with Lily here. Lily looked at the box. What's in it? Something for Sophie, he said. Lily looked at Sophie. Sophie looked at the box with an expression that was trying very hard not to be overwhelmed and was losing that effort. Ethan, you said yes in August, he said.
This is just the version of it you can wear. Sophie opened the box. It was not an elaborate ring, a simple gold band with a small stone, the kind of thing he'd spent a week looking at before he understood that the right one was the one that looked like it was meant to last rather than meant to impress. Sophie put her hand to her mouth for a second. Then she took it out and put it on and looked at it, and Lily craned over to look too. "It's pretty," Lily said. "It is," Sophie said. Her voice was not entirely steady. "Does it mean you're staying?" Lily asked. Sophie looked at Lily, and the almost overwhelmed thing finally made it all the way to her face, the full weight of it, all the months, the driving, the knocking, the back steps, the ladybug book, the uneven pigtails, the crayon drawing with the six-fingered hand. She put both arms around Lily and held on, and Lily patted her back with the matter-of-fact comfort of a child who had seen adults need hugs before and had no confusion about what to do. "Yes," Sophie said. "It means I'm staying." "Good," Lily said, still patting. "I already told my teacher you lived with us." Sophie laughed into Lily's hair, the real laugh, uncontrolled. "Lily." "She asked about my family," Lily said, completely untroubled. Ethan sat across the table and watched them, and did not try to do anything with what he was feeling because there wasn't any shape for it. It was too full for a shape. It was just there, the way sunlight is just there, the way the morning is just there, not asking to be understood, just present and warm and actual. There is a particular thing that happens when you stop running from what you want. Not a dramatic transformation, not a sudden clarity, just a slow settling, like sediment in water that's been agitated and is finally being left alone. Things that seemed complicated become simple. Not easy, simple. There's a difference. Sophie understood this by November in a way she hadn't in August, in a way she maybe hadn't since she was 12 years old, and didn't yet know that she'd spend the next 18 years mistaking distance for direction. She sat at her kitchen table with her coffee and her 4 clients and her green couch, and the crayon drawing framed on the wall, 3 figures, varying heights, standing in front of the garage, and she understood that the life she was living was the life she'd been measuring every other life against. She just needed to stop moving long enough to find it. The work was good because she was in control of what she took. She said no more than she said yes, which would have been inconceivable 2 years ago, and now was just the ordinary practice of knowing what you were worth and not offering it to people who didn't know how to value it. Priya called her occasionally. She'd left the firm herself in September, started something new, and sometimes needed a second opinion from someone she trusted. Sophie gave it freely because she could, because her time was hers now in a way that meant generosity didn't cost her the same way it used to. Ethan's business grew. Not dramatically, but steadily, the way good things grow when they stop being held together with desperation and start being held together with actual competence. He hired a part-time mechanic named Gil in the fall, a quiet man in his 50s who knew engines the way Ethan did and asked no unnecessary questions, which was the main qualification. It meant Ethan could close on time more often. It meant Lily's dinners were at 7 instead of 8:30. It meant evenings, which turned out to be the most valuable thing. Not wealth, not status, not the corner office. Evenings. The specific gift of having hours in a day that weren't already spoken for. They got married on a Saturday in March, small and deliberate. 20 people in Ethan's backyard, strung lights, food from the taco place on the corner that Sophie had decided made the best she'd had anywhere, which Ethan agreed with and Lily agreed with even more emphatically. Mrs. Delgado cried. Marcus did not cry, but stood very still in the way he did when he was having feelings he'd decided not to name. Priya flew down from her new city and stood next to Sophie and held her flowers when her hand shook, which they did, just slightly during the part where you say the words. Lily wore a dress she'd picked herself, yellow, because yellow was clearly the right choice, and stood beside Sophie during the ceremony with the posture of someone who had taken on an official role and intended to carry it with dignity. She held Sophie's hand. When the thing was over and everyone was talking and the lights were doing what they did in the early spring dark, Lily found Ethan and pulled his sleeve. "We're a family now," she said. Informative, not questioning, just making sure he had the correct data.
We've been a family, he said. She considered this. More official now, though. Sure, he said. More official. She nodded, satisfied, and went back to the food table, her yellow dress luminous in the string lights, and Ethan watched her go and then looked across the backyard to where Sophie was standing with Priya and Mrs.
Delgado holding a taco and laughing at something with her whole face, the crown of her dark hair catching the light, and she turned her head as if she'd felt him looking, which she probably had, because they'd been doing that for years without acknowledging it. And she looked back at him across the yard with an expression he'd never been able to name but had memorized completely. He raised his glass. She raised her taco. Not a perfect evening. The lights flickered twice and Marcus had to fiddle with an extension cord. Lily spilled horchata on her yellow dress at some point and was briefly devastated until Sophie pointed out that yellow hid stains surprisingly well, which was not true, but said with such conviction that Lily accepted it immediately. Ethan's speech ran short because he was not a man who spoke well in front of groups, and he'd known this going in and had made peace with it, so he said what he had to say in about 4 sentences and then raised his glass and let the evening do the rest of the work. And the evening did. The way evenings do, when the people in them are real and the food is good and nobody is performing anything. They just carry themselves until the lights come down and the last guest goes home and it's quiet again, the good quiet, the kind that has something in it. There is a version of this story that would want to end on the wedding, the arch of it, the resolution of it, the symbolic weight. And that version isn't wrong. It's just incomplete. Because the real thing, the thing that mattered more than the ceremony or the ring or any of the singular moments, was every ordinary Tuesday after. The coffee made wrong because they both liked it differently and they'd never quite agreed on the middle setting. The mornings when Lily woke up too early and padded into their room and wedged herself between them with her elbows in unreasonable places and refused to acknowledge that 6 a.m. was not a normal time to discuss ladybugs. The evenings when Sophie's work ran over and Ethan had to do dinner alone and did it without resentment because resentment was a thing they'd both decided to catch early and examine rather than let accumulate. The Sunday calls with Jamie that Lily still took in her room with the door closed. The ones that were still a complicated thing, and probably always would be, because some things don't resolve cleanly, and the right response to that isn't to pretend otherwise. Sophie learned to live with the complexity of it, not gracefully, not always, but honestly. There were evenings she felt the edge of the older shape of her life, the clean apartment, and the controlled schedule, and the absence of anyone who needed her to read a book for the 5th time because they were checking if she was paying attention. She felt the edge of it, and she didn't pretend she didn't. She told Ethan about it on the back steps one September evening, about a year into being married, because she'd decided that keeping the complicated things in the drawer with the socket sets was not something she was going to do. I miss being alone sometimes, she said. I don't want to be alone. I just miss the option of it. He was quiet for a moment. That's fair. I feel terrible saying it. Don't, he said. Wanting your own space and wanting the life you have aren't opposites. She looked at him. When did you figure that out? I didn't, he said. Mrs. Delgado told me that when Lily was 2. I've been thinking about it ever since. She laughed. The real one. You should have led with that. She'd want credit. She can have it. He handed her his beer and she took it even though she didn't particularly want beer, just because he'd offered it and the offering was its own language. They sat in the September dark, the city below them doing its patient nighttime thing, the same parking lot, the same swaying steps, the same partial stars through the yellow city light. I drove 4 hours, she said, not for the first time. I know, he said. I knocked 3 times. I remember. I didn't know what I was doing, she said. I want you to know I still think about that. That I showed up on your doorstep at 11 at night and I didn't have a plan and I didn't know what I was asking for. You were asking to be somewhere real, he said. That's all. She looked at him. Was it enough? That I showed up like that? Without a plan? Without being sure? He looked back at her in the dark, in the years of evenings they'd accumulated, in the weight of the ordinary life they'd built on the completely unremarkable foundation of 2 people being honest with each other about what they wanted. Sophie, he said, you knocked. That was everything. She was quiet for a long time. Below them, a car went by slow, someone's radio on low, the chorus of something she half recognized and couldn't name. The lights in the windows of the building across the way, kitchens, living rooms, the ordinary illumination of people moving through their evenings. She put her head on his shoulder. He put his arm around her. The steps swayed slightly in the wind, the way they always did. There are people who go their whole lives looking for the place that feels like themselves, the city, the work, the person, and never quite land. And there are people who had it young and lost it in the particular way that ambition and distance and the performance of a life can cause you to lose things that seemed like they'd always be there. Sophie had been the second kind, the kind who had to drive a long way in the dark to find her way back to the thing she'd never stopped measuring everything else against. She had knocked 3 times, hesitant, not sure she was supposed to be there. He had opened the door, and the rest of it, the coffee made wrong, the ladybug book, the green couch, the ring on a Saturday morning, the yellow dress, and the spilled horchata, the back steps, and the swaying and the partial stars. The rest of it was just what happened when 2 people stopped performing their lives and started actually living them, together, in the ordinary, imperfect, completely specific shape of what they actually were, which was enough, more than enough. It was everything.